Good morning. Welcome to this Select Committee on Science and Technology. In our first session, we have three witnesses who are coming in online. We have Dr. Paul Gibson, the Chief Constable of Lincolnshire Police, and he is the National Police Council Forensic Portfolio Lead. And Jayne Meir is the Deputy Chief Constable of Northumbria Police, and she is the National Police Council Digital Forensic Lead. And we have Joe Osborne, who's the Senior Commercial Director for BlueLight Commercial. So you're all very welcome. And I would like to just start to say that, of course, I think you all know that this present inquiry is following up on our 2018 inquiry, which we were investigating forensic science and the criminal justice system in England and Wales. And at that time, the Forensic Capability Network was just being set up. So it'd be very good, please, if you could set out for us the role that you believe that the Forensic Capability Network now plays, and what work is ongoing, and whether it has improved the delivery of forensic sciences in practice. More broadly, we'd be interested in what changes you've seen in the forensic science system since 2018. And we'd like to know also what you think are the major challenges that you're seeing facing forensic science in England and Wales right now. So let's start with you, Dr. Gibson, and then I'll ask the other two witnesses to come in as well.
And thank you, Chair, and good morning, colleagues. So I'll start with the Forensic Capability Network. I was certainly involved in the initial part of setting up the network, and it was first established back in 2020. It went through a strategic review in 2022 and is now currently operating in its current guise since 2023. I would say that the FCN, as we call it, is an established national forensic capability. It's certainly relied upon by forces and other stakeholders to assist policing. And the FCN's remit really is to undertake activities nationally once for the benefit of all forces rather than repeating initiatives 43 times. If I just give you a flavour upon their remit, they work on quality and compliance. So they are assisting forces in meeting the regulator's code of practice and the necessary accreditation. They certainly have helped me in MPCC support because I've chaired many critical incidents over the last 6 or 7 years with regard to the forensic marketplace particularly. They're involved in facilitating and coordinating research and innovation across policing. They are assisting certainly with the marketplace in terms of procurement of physical and digital forensics. And they are assisting certainly Jayne in her role as National DF Lead in terms of national performance frameworks and other initiatives as well. If I move on to the second question, if I may, around what changes have you seen since 2018? Well, actually, I picked up the Forensic Marketplace portfolio back in 2018. So I've been in and amongst the portfolio since then. Now, I think some of the biggest areas that we're seeing is that obviously technology and digital forensics now has a touch point in almost every investigation within policing, which obviously introduces considerable volume. I think the volume and the complexity of digital evidence is growing. Obviously, we have devices that are becoming infinitely more voluminous in terms of the data they hold and the complexity in which they hold it. And we've started to see increased automation across advanced analytics and digital forensics and other services as well. I think, a big issue, I think, is also accreditation and regulatory compliance, which the Forensic Science Regulator has introduced in order to ensure safe and robust evidence enters the criminal justice system. And that has been applied across both policing and also for private and commercial providers as well. So I think that covers the second question. And in terms of the major challenges that you see facing forensics in England and Wales right now, My portfolio has a number of sub-portfolio leads, which ranges from digital forensics, Jayne's here, of course, quality and regulatory compliance, marketplace sustainability, workforce retention and well-being, and it is those sub-leads that essentially report to me to assist in making sure that we are cognizant of the risks that there are in forensic science, and we're making sure that we're putting the correct safeguards and processes in place to try and mitigate those risks. So, things like deep fakes, synthetic media, AI, digital forensics, there's many challenges that we're grappling with. But perhaps that's a good point, Chair, for me to pause and perhaps ask some of our technical experts to give an input around those areas, if that's okay.
Thank you very much. Ms. Meir, would you like to start and then enlarge on some of those points and the questions I asked at the beginning?
Yeah, so in terms of the FCN itself, as Dr. Gibson has stressed, what they've been able to do is support the digital forensics community to ensure that as they gain accreditation in relation to digital forensics activity, there is the consistency and the capability to get that accreditation and provide necessary support and engagement with the forensic science regulator. Particularly of note, they are now working on a triage framework in order that the forensic science regulator can be satisfied that some of the frontline triage of digital devices is compliant with the expectations of the regulator, but enables a broad range of officers and staff to undertake that activity on the front line. What the FCN has also been able to do is help us to embed a performance framework across our digital forensics units, across 43 forces. And that has been very tricky because each force does things in a slightly different way. And when you are trying to measure performance, you need a consistency in language and things like I think you'll understand the word backlog, but actually what does that mean in terms of digital devices? At what stage do we measure them entering into the digital forensics process, and where are they at any stage in that system? So that has helped us understand where some of our risks and challenges are. What we've been working with the FCN on most recently is to understand what digital forensics tools are available to us, what the strength of the marketplace is, and how we may tackle emerging risks in the digital forensics portfolio, particularly relating to deep fakes that have been mentioned. And we're now supporting a Home Office task and finish group that's specifically looking at the issues of AI within the criminal justice system, both in terms of benefits, but also in terms of the sort of potential corruption for evidence within that system. So the Forensics Capability Network have been able to support us in doing that on behalf of 43 forces, enabling us to speak as sort of one voice and seek improvements in the way we deal with digital forensics material. I suppose the specific difference around digital forensics is the pace of change and the need for policing and other government bodies to keep up with the challenges of emerging technologies in a way that accreditation sometimes creates issues for us in terms of new phones, new computers, new tools and techniques that are needed, but the requirement obviously for effective accreditation to ensure that evidence is verified and can support criminal justice activity. So that's how the FCN has been supporting us and what some of the major challenges have been, but more than happy to pick up on any more detail should you need it.
Thank you very much. We're going to ask a lot more questions, and we're also going to be talking about procurement, which is very, very important for you, Ms. Osborne, in terms of BlueLight's role. But perhaps you could introduce yourself at this stage and tell us a bit about BlueLight, and then Absolutely. We'll move on to more general questions.
Okay, good morning all. I'm Jo Osborne. I'm one of the senior commercial directors from BlueLight Commercial. BlueLight was established in 2020. We're a not-for-profit, wholly owned policing company, limited by guarantee. So we're owned by the Police and Crime Commissioners, and all work that we do is directed by them. So we're essentially there to do things once instead of 43 times across the key areas of spend. Everything from sort of fleet to aviation, uniform, and obviously forensics, which is what we're here to talk about today. So since we were established in 2020, forensics came in around 2022. So that wasn't an initial category. There was a transfer of responsibility. And I guess from a forensics point, we're trying to look at things once. That single voice to the market that Jayne just mentioned is really important. We had very disparate responses, people competing in the market at the same time. So across both digital and physical forensics, because we cover both elements, we've been putting processes and routes to market in place in partnership with colleagues from FCN. I think it's worth mentioning that we do work really closely with them. There are if you like, they're the technical experts that help with developing specifications, the code, compliance with code and accreditation issues. So that's where BlueLight was established. We are a contracting authority, so we're able to, that's why we're set up as we are, so that we can contract on behalf of all.
Okay, that's a very useful start. Thank you. We're going to go on now to more detailed questions about procurement of forensic services, and I'm sure that you'll be able to help us on that. Baroness Young.
Just before I go on to procurement questions, perhaps as Meir could just fill us in a bit more on a point she made that I didn't quite understand about when a device gets registered and enters the backlog queue.
So I think the term backlog has been used when we come to digital forensics devices. So when officers attend an incident, they may seize mobile phones, laptops, various different digital media. That's obviously now in police receipt. But actually, when it is submitted to a digital forensics unit, maybe some weeks thereafter, that's because an investigative owner will need to set a strategy and decide which digital devices are relevant to the investigation and which ones should be examined first. They will go through a triage process and they will enter into a digital forensics unit potentially a few weeks after they've been seized, if not perhaps a number of months later, because the criminal prosecution service asks for a device to be looked at. Once it's received into a digital forensics unit, it is always triaged to identify what information is needed from it and what processes should be used to extract the relevant information. And at that point, we would potentially show it being received into a digital forensics unit, but then it's prioritized. And it is normally when it's arrived in that unit and a prioritization process has been undertaken, that it is then added to what we might class as the work queue. But each force in the country was probably describing that process from officer receiving the device in the first instance to the original triage and then submission to a digital forensics unit in a slightly different way. And therefore, when we would say, how many devices have you got waiting to analyze, they may be counting things at a different stage of the process. So what we've had to do is try and get a consistent approach for the description of the business process from initial receipt through triage and basically ownership by a digital forensics unit in order that we can describe the numbers in a more effective way.
Thank you very much. Could I just talk about the concerns that I think we identified in the original inquiry and also the Westminster Commission identified about whether we've actually got a market for forensics at the moment. If we take physical forensics and digital, they're probably slightly differently, but a lot of work being done in force, particularly for physical forensics. And one large provider in Eurofins, whose chief exec we discovered also chairs the trade body, as far as I could see, perhaps I'm wrong in that. This doesn't feel too much of a market at the moment. Is that a problem for you? And if so, if not, what mechanisms are there for ensuring that there is adequate competition and that somebody does look at the market as a whole? Perhaps Dr. Gibson would like to start.
Okay, thank you, certainly, and I'll give my view and then perhaps ask Joe to add any further detail if need be. I think at the moment we've got a much more collegiate approach in terms of working with the market. Now, as you say, it's a small market, and there are barriers to entry, and the barriers to entry are things like the level of profitability there is in the market. Also things like accreditation and regulation. It needs to be to a set standard, of course. And this has led to a market that is relatively constrained. So there's not significant levels of competition within the UK. We have in the past, around some critical incidents, looked at the possibility of utilising overseas markets, although there are some challenges within that. But I know that's been looked at by the FCN again, has been actively considered. So therefore, the levels of competition are perhaps not where we want them to be. And as you've quite rightly articulated, we have a relatively dominant market at present, with Eurofins and Cellmark being held by the same company group. What I would say is that from my time as the NPCC lead for the marketplace, we have seen many critical incidents over the years, some of which have ended up in kind of Cobra type environments, so quite significant. But what I would say is that with the Forensic Capability Network, with BlueLight Commercial, working with NPCC, and now we have the Director of Forensics for the Home Office, we have a much greater infrastructure to support in terms of managing the market. Now, is there work to be done? Yes, of course there is. But I think our aim of policing being an intelligent customer that speaks with one voice, which I think Joe alluded to earlier, is now coming to the fore because we've actually managed to get a single procurement route to the commercial market. And then that allows us to make sure that we can manage contracts much more effectively in terms of performance and terms around times. It allows us to predict demand, so therefore suppliers can up or down capacity according to policing's need. So whilst I think there is some work to do, I've certainly seen a step change over the last 6 or 7 years that I've been involved in this area of the business. So hopefully that's helpful, but happy to take any further questions.
When procurement decisions are being made, do you think there is a constant eye kept on the overall market and whether the competition is producing better results for you and needs expanded, i.e. more players in the market?
Yeah, I think we certainly have an overview and a strategic viewpoint on the market, because what we want is a flexible market, an agile market, one that gives value for money, but also allows for the sufficient profit to make companies attracted to this particular business. So I think we do take the overview, but because there are so few players that have the accreditation or the will to enter the market, then I guess we have to work with what we've got. And therefore, and Joe will be able to talk about this more, but in terms of any dominance of the market, that's where we then put measures in place, like open book accounting, making sure we're keeping a very close eye on procurements, making sure that procurements are sequenced and in order and coordinated and not conflicting with each other. And that therefore allows us some way of being able to manage the market, but we are constrained by the number of suppliers that are prepared to enter the market itself.
Thank you.
I think it's our understanding that there is only one supplier. Is that right?
So you have
is it physical?
Eurofins in physical, yeah. So Eurofins, Cellmark, about 80% of the market, and then you have other players like Key Forensics and others that make up the remaining 20%. But again, Joe may be able to assist with any more details should you wish to.
Yes, I'm sorry. When I said one supplier, I really meant one major supplier, or the major supplier. Ms. Osborne, would you like to add?
Yes, you're quite right. There is one major supplier. They are sister companies, Eurofins and Cellmark, owned by the same group. but they do share directors in terms of managing directors and commercial directors. And then there are 3 other smaller providers. So we do have a single route to market, a dynamic purchasing system, which is a type of framework. And as Dr. Gibson mentioned, we have worked really closely to get the single voice to market. So BlueLight will run competitions. We do ensure that they're not run at the same time, which was happening in the past. And the process does centre around capacity and capability. So we look a lot at market stability before making decisions. The process runs from a qualitative and cost perspective, and also an element of social value. And so we're testing across all those 3 areas. And like I said, before any decisions are made, we work closely with colleagues in Force and in FCN to look at allocation to make sure there is sustainability across the market. I would say that it's not perfect. We are, with the new Director of Science from the Home Office, we will be looking at the next generation, particularly with events that have happened recently for the next generation of procurement. We're about to start that piece of work in the new year. And the barriers to entry remain something that is one of the biggest challenges to us, as was mentioned previously. So we'll be looking at how we can develop the market and encourage particularly SMEs to get more involved. So, we've seen some turbulent times, but we do the best that we can, I think, and without people having to put the cost in bidding numerous times, we do aggregate that demand and we forecast as much as we can in this area so that they know the type of demand that we're likely to have.
Thank you. Mr. Meir, would you like to add anything? I mean, specifically around digital forensics. We're going to talk more about digital forensics. Is there anything you want to add at this point about procurement?
Yes, Chair. Thank you. Sorry.
I'm sorry, I've just asked Ms. Meir whether she could...
I thought you did. I thought you mentioned me. Sorry.
Ms. Meir, sorry, could you just...
Yes, what we see as significant benefit with the support from BlueLight Commercial is how we procure digital forensics tools into forces. So we use quite significant and expensive software in order that we can triage digital forensics material. We can also support the digital forensics processes. And what we have started to work on with BlueLight Commercial is a framework approach, which means that 43 forces can actually use the buying power of a central procurement framework to improve the purchasing power of forces. But also what we're able to do through that process is become, as Dr. Gibson said, more of an intelligent customer in terms of the requirements that we have from policing into providers to ensure that we get improved software and tools to improve the digital forensics processes, which all go to reducing costs in forces.
Okay, thank you very much. Lord Stern.
Thank you. As you can see, we are trying to understand the markets here or the market, and you've been very, very helpful. The market, of course, we've been discussing is for external services, and there's obviously a great deal that's done internally. Could you give us a feel for the balance of how much you put out and how much you do in-house? We've made some progress in looking at the data on how much is done outside because that's more public. But do you collect data on how much of these services are done inside? Could you give us a feel for the balance between the two? Because obviously when you're talking about markets, one thing is markets, how they work for external suppliers, but the internal story is clearly a big part of that market. Could you help us with that, please?
Who would like to start on that? Dr. Gibson?
Yes, that's absolutely fine. Thank you. So I think when we look at the physical forensic market, I would say it's largely outsourced in terms of specialist provision of the order of around about £60 million or so. But obviously with physical forensics, we also have certain processes and certain capacity that needs to be maintained locally. So your crime scene investigators, that sort of thing. So I would say it's a blended approach from that point of view. I think if we look at the digital forensic marketplace, that probably works in the opposite, because digital forensics has evolved over the years within forces, and therefore there's a less mature market in terms of what is outsourced to external providers. But of course, Joe has just mentioned around the dynamic purchasing system and the work that we do to make sure that we're acting as that intelligent customer that we've articulated. I would approximate that the internal demand is probably around about 500 to 550 million in terms of cost. But I do agree that that is much more difficult to ascertain, because that is something that is essentially coordinated within the budgets of the forces. But that being said, what we are doing is essentially coordinating information trawls through the portfolios and through both BlueLight Commercial and the FCN to ensure that we've got as accurate a picture as we can with regard to spend, with regard to processes, etc. So there's more work to be done with regard to certainly the internal market and understanding what that cost base is. Certainly with the Director of Forensics that's been appointed, Amanda Jayne Balfour, we're working very closely with her. She's only been in post just a few weeks, but one of the things that we are talking about is what's called the Forensic Marketplace Strategic Plan, which is something that has been developed by the Forensic Capability Network. And what this does is look at various strands about how we deliver forensics for policing in England and Wales. So that involves commercial providers, in-house provision, and also those things that may be beneficial to be able to deliver from a national line point of view. And some of that work is being undertaken, but we do need further resource and further money to be able to take that work further forward. So we're having active discussions with the Director of Forensics within the Home Office to incorporate that as part of her plan to transform forensics here in England and Wales. So I hope that helps.
It does help, but could I just ask for one bit of clarification? You mentioned a number of 500 million or so, 550. Was that the physical side, or was it physical and the digital?
I think that would be amalgamation, but as I'm sure you'll appreciate, it's an approximation because we don't have as detailed financial information, but that's our approximation across both areas.
It's probably fair to say that the big majority is done in-house. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so, and that's partly because of the digital forensics growing up in-house. But I think there are things that do need to be delivered locally with local flexibility according to local priorities, and that will be a cost that would be built into the kind of force envelope, if that makes sense from a financial point of view.
Thank you. And could I ask just one further question around the meaning, or what is it that's contracted out? Because we heard from one of our witnesses of the importance in forensics of end to end, all the way beginning with, the crime scene and all the way through. And it strikes us that there's some, formal testing which you can do in laboratories, which are moderately straightforward to contract out. But is there any sense in which you can contract out the end-to-end story?
I think that would be a possibility, but would involve quite a significant change. You'll be aware of the Forensic Science Service.
Sorry, I'm not trying to encourage that. I'm just trying to understand the process. And you're telling us that it is actually quite difficult to think of how you contract out that end-to-end story.
Yeah, I think so. The model would always be that your frontline CSIs are usually force-based for obvious reasons. Now, what employment mechanisms they have, you could envisage that could be part of a bigger legal entity rather than being employed within forces. So, I think that it's a very pertinent question, and that is something that's been actively considered as part of the white paper and forensic reform, which has its own discrete strand now within the reform work. So we are considering all eventualities about how we can best transform the system for the benefit of the victims of crime that we serve, of course.
Thank you very much. Ms. Meir Osborne, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I think just the state of the market, I would say at the moment, is why we've not sort of looked at that in the past. But I would agree with Paul. I think it's really pertinent, given that we'll be looking at the new commercial strategy across both digital and physical to explore that.
Ms. Osborne?
That was Ms. Meir.
I'm so sorry, Ms. Meir.
I would agree. I think the end-to-end processes are complex, particularly around digital forensics, where you have often police officers seizing the original devices and potentially triaging them at a local level. But police reform and forensics reform is a significant opportunity for us to see what operating models would be most efficient and effective. And certainly there are definite improvements that can be made, because the current 43 force model isn't as efficient as it absolutely could be.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much.
Baroness Walmsley.
Thank you. My question is initially for Ms. Osborne, but I'm sure others will have an opinion. Can I just read you one sentence from the way in which BlueLight Commercial describes itself? And it says, running forensic contracts and frameworks nationally strengthens the fragile forensic marketplace and saves policing significant money and resources, while still giving local forces flexibility over which services they use. So I wonder if you could say how well you think that is working, when, as we've just heard, we have predominantly one buyer and one major provider. In fact, we heard from Eurofins that very little, I think 9% of their work is for the defence, and we have a race to the bottom on price, which we've also heard means a reduction in the quantity and quality of the services available. So I wonder if you could tell us what steps you're taking in conjunction perhaps with the Home Office and perhaps the new director and with forensic science providers to introduce a sustainable contracting and realistic costing to sustain a much healthier market in forensic services than we have at the moment.
Yes, I will. So in terms of as the situation was, we've got 43 forces all contracting in very disparate methods, which was adding cost to an already fragile market. With the work that we've done to create the one voice, we've been able to introduce standardized products and specifications, the same process, so that suppliers get used to that. We've maintained, whilst there is only, if I talk on the physical side, whilst there are only 5 suppliers currently in the market, we've managed to maintain that they're still there. We've also introduced indexation. So at one point, I think you've probably been told about the race to the bottom, as you alluded to, and unfair pricing. So we have looked to standardize pricing. We've looked to introduce indexation so that prices have increased. I'm not saying there's not more to do on that respect. And we're also looking at strategic supplier relationship management, so working really closely with those 5 key suppliers to make sure that we understand demand, we understand capacity, and they know where to come. They're not being pulled in 43 directions. So I would say there's still work to do. But the stabilisation of the market, whilst I think it needs to grow, we've stabilised for now. I think, as I mentioned earlier, market development in terms of bringing particularly SMEs in is something that we would want to do. Reform gives us that opportunity, and particularly with the new director, we are looking to start developing a new commercial strategy that will underpin the work that she does. So whilst it's not perfect, I think we have maintained the suppliers in the market, and we have given them a share of the work that they're able to cope with from a capacity perspective.
So they're hanging in there by their teeth, but not able to grow. Is that right?
I think I would say they're not just hanging in there by their teeth. They were at one point. I think it's got significantly better since then, not least of which, like I say, because of the price differentials. The recent round of competitions have seen a fair share of the work. Obviously, capacity does become an issue, and we have to measure that. And also, they've got to be accreditors as well. Some of them are not for some of the lots, and because obviously we need to make sure that that's in place.
Thank you. Would either of the police colleagues wish to comment on that?
Just very briefly, if I may, I think when we get to actually the new year, the new financial year, we will have all police forces in England and Wales that are going through the same procurement route for forensic services from external suppliers. That doesn't sound like a massive achievement, but actually it is. And as Joe has alluded to, what that allows us to do is to be far more cognizant of keeping the market as buoyant as possible. So therefore, there's a consideration about how you then apportion the lots on the different criteria of the procurement. But the benefit is that you're actually doing it from one viewpoint rather than from multiple viewpoints that each can't see each other. So one lens looking into how we procure forensic services, particularly from physical forensics, I think is a real coup for us and a real positive. Although there's more work to do, I do accept.
Ms. Meir, would you like to add anything?
I would agree. Fundamentally, our ability to engage with the market as one voice is seeing significant improvements, and we are in a position now, certainly from a software and tooling perspective, that BlueLight Commercial will be able to support us with that. In terms of engagement with the marketplace, in terms of the number of devices we put into commercial providers, that is something that we're working with the FCN on to try and level the submissions into the marketplace, because at the moment it can be erratic depending on force budgets, and when forces are constrained financially, they keep things in-house, and we are looking to try and level that off with the marketplace, and the FCN work very closely with forces and suppliers to try and work that demand management out more effectively.
Thank you. Viscount Stansgate.
Good morning. We have been given evidence to suggest that there are certain specialisms in the physical forensic science area, such as marks and traces, fibres, certain aspects of forensic toxicology and so on, that are at risk of dying out. Now, the NPCC submission to our previous inquiry said that work would be undertaken to include, and I quote, long-term plans to ensure the sustainability of individual forensic disciplines, unquote. Can I ask what plans have been made to ensure that we do have these capabilities available for when they're needed, and is specific funding set aside for this? Perhaps Dr. Gibson first.
Okay, thank you. Again, a very relevant question. So we are well aware of the risks that exist to the provision of some niche services, as you say, marks, traces, some aspects of toxicology. And there is an element of the fact that these analyses aren't particularly profitable for the commercial market. And that is why there is this concern, quite rightly articulated, about not being able to keep this capability. Now, we're very keen from a policing perspective that we do retain the capability, because it's part of our armoury in terms of our forensics analysis for serving victims of crime. And I alluded to it briefly earlier, but we have the strategic marketplace plan, which includes provision to ensure the sustainability of niche services. Now, some of these actions are already underway, but as mentioned, some others require investment and also resources to fully complete this piece of work. And this will and is likely to be part of the forensic director's initial plan for delivery, which will work very closely with her on to make sure that we can actually safeguard these really, really important analyses, so that it can continue to support our investigations to give the very best quality of service we can.
Thank you. Can we go to your colleague next?
Joe?
Yeah, okay, thank you. So I think it is a fair question. Whilst those niche services are included in the framework at the moment, I think when we start to look at the next generation and the strategy for that, we need to explore other contractual mechanisms, retainers perhaps, things like that. So that is something that we do keep discussing with the providers and in terms of the service provision for now. But I do think that there are areas we could improve on within the niche services.
Ms. Meir, anything to add?
I think the niche service point is less pertinent in the digital forensics world. What is important, though, to recognise is we need commercial suppliers to research and develop tools to help us in policing to undertake digital forensics work in-house. So the requirement here of the marketplace is very much about that speed of development, which is how we best get sort of the best bang for our buck, as we say. I think fundamentally for us, if we haven't got a healthy supplier market in terms of digital forensic software and tooling, then that's where we will slow down our ability to interrogate what are becoming more and more sophisticated devices with significant amounts of material within each one.
A very quick follow-up question. Do you worry that in the future there may be miscarriages of justice because of the lack of some of these physical forensic science disciplines?
I think from my perspective, all of our forensic science disciplines are covered by the regulator, which is something that's obviously changed since your last inquiry. And moving towards a regulated, accredited service across all of forensic science, I think gives us significant safeguard to make sure that the quality and validity of our evidence is good.
Okay, thank you. Baroness Noble-Jones.
Thank you, Chairman. With the significant amount of the forensic work being done by the police force, you obviously become a very powerful player in the market itself. Could you say what measures you're taking to safeguard against the risks that inevitably arise of being a dominant element in a marketplace? In particular, what you're doing to ensure that tests and the work you carry out is impartial, because you're deciding not only which tests but also how they should be conducted, which gives, seems to me, a very, very considerable weight to what you consider to be important. Does that lead to a situation or a danger, do you, in your view, that you begin to mould the market? That's to say, you have the effect of deciding what the market actually does and what it fails to do because you don't request it. So, in effect, that you become a market maker as well as a market taker and performer. And also, could you say something about what my colleague mentioned, which was that something like 9% of the forensic work is done for the defence? How that really squares with equality of arms between prosecution and defence? I mean, it is potentially an extremely worrying situation if the defence is not getting access to forensic science that it should be allowed to have in order to demonstrate its case. Dr. Gibson, perhaps you'd like to start off.
Yes, certainly. So I think that the provision of forensic science, particularly physical, I'll let Jayne talk about the digital, but particularly from a physical point of view,
right,
it is a blended market. But I would say that the most complex, high volume, more significant analyses take part in the commercial market. The element of the market that exists in-house are for more simple types of analysis and also the collection of exhibits from crime scene investigators, etc. So what I would say is that with the activities that take place in-house, the staff and processes, again, need to adhere to stringent quality controls, which again links to the regulation and the legislation that's been introduced from that point of view. And that also contains competency assessments for our individuals that are involved in that particular line of work. I think in terms of the Director of Forensics and the work going forward, there is an anticipation that forensics can be delivered on a national, regional and local basis with different tiers of service that sit within each of those realms. And that's something that we are working through as part of the transformation plan. In terms of the defence question, then as far as I'm aware, then defence obviously have access to forensic suppliers in order to complete the necessary tests. Unfortunately, what I don't have is any further detail with regard to any occasions where it's asked for and there's no capacity to do it. It's not something that's certainly come across my desk as a significant risk, but I can appreciate why you would answer the question. But I'll let Joe and Jayne just add to that if that's okay. Thank you.
Ms. Meir?
So as I've said, the marketplace for digital forensics is slightly different, where it is more about your routine examination of mobile phones and computers, and is often a sort of an outflow of demand from forces into the marketplace, and therefore it's not necessarily the niche or specialist services. What is essential for us is the ability of suppliers to develop software capability that we can then procure to use to unencrypt material, to unlock phones, to triage material, large amounts of digital devices. And that marketplace, there is good competition, but we could obviously always seek to engender more. As for sort of the ability of the defence to access their own digital forensics experts, I have not come across any issues with them being able to do that. They also are able to look in detail at the forensics reports that are done around digital forensics. But because we have the forensic science regulator who is ensuring that the digital forensics units are fully accredited in the work that they're doing, there is also greater confidence, I think, that the digital forensics products that are being put into the criminal justice sort of evidence chain are robust and produced in a consistent manner. So the defence do have the ability to scrutinise those reports and scrutinise the activity of any digital forensics investigator, but they are also able to look at the devices themselves and utilise their own digital forensics experts should they wish. And the demand is outstripping supply in all areas because of the growth of digital material, but I don't see that there's been any issue in terms of defence being able to gain that capability.
Ms. Osborne, can I just ask you, you mentioned in, I think, a previous answer that you developed a standardised provision, I think you called it, standardised product. Yes. How does that square with what we've also heard, which is that the more complex investigations are the ones that you tend to outsource? How do you combine standardisation with what is claimed to be described as being more complex?
So the arrangements do allow for that. They allow for the supplier to use their expertise in a managed service so that they can determine which is the best process or procedures to use to get the outcomes that would be required. So it does allow for that flexibility. It allows for the simple test through to the full case management. There is a range of services within the framework that can be offered. And like I said, they do vary. So there is the ability to use the supplier expertise. I think sometimes budget constraints don't allow for that to sometimes be as full as there may be. And there are still disparate approaches to commissioning of work, which obviously the Director of Forensics from the Home Office and Dr. Gibson and the portfolio will be looking at under reform to make sure that there isn't a postcode lottery.
Can I just ask you, perhaps all three of you, you give the impression of while the market isn't perfect, it's pretty much doing its job, and there's no real cause for worry on the issues that I've raised with you. Is that your position? Is that your view, Dr. Gibson?
I think that the market is in a better place than it was when I picked up the portfolio 6 or 7 years ago.
Doesn't mean it's good.
I still think there's an awful lot of room for improvement, and We have the thinking, the confidence, and the plans to take that forward. And I think it will be a prominent period over the next 2 or 3 years working with the Home Office to actually transform our way of thinking to see what is possible. And I do think there is a lot of transform that we can introduce in order to improve things, exponentially further. So I think it's okay at present. It's better than it was, but there's more work to do.
Thank you. John,
Okay,
I might
thank
want
you.
to explore that.
Baroness Willis.
So I'd like to take this down a slightly different route. These questions have been really, really illuminating. And it's one to do with consistency of training and understanding about the forensic approaches across the 43 different forces. So do you feel, well, the first thing is, is there training that everybody gets that's the same? So does everyone have the same level of understanding of what is currently available? But also, how do different forces become aware of the new technologies coming through, and also how things are changing, like our understanding of DNA and how detailed it is now to a point where it can almost sort of wrap you up in another layer of problems. I wonder, Dr. Gibson, if you could comment on that first.
Yeah, of course. So there are accredited training courses that we make sure that our people attend, and we measure their competence. That will obviously differ according to which discipline that you are in. I think the second sort of element would be to talk about, again, the regulation. So when you look at the compliance with the codes of practice for the regulator, it is exceptionally stringent in terms of how much work you need to do to make sure that you are adhering to the codes. And that gives a high degree of standardization in terms of how we're delivering. Now, adherence to the codes and to the accreditation in physical forensics is more advanced than digital forensics and areas such as CCTV at this moment in time, albeit that is starting to progress as well. I think in terms of good practice, I think, again, it's a very good question, because there are pockets of good practice where, even within my own region, EMSU, East Midlands Specialist Operations Unit, that has a single forensics hub that serves the 5 forces of the East Midlands, the same in Yorkshire and the Humber and other areas as well. And I think there's more that we can do to make sure that good practice is shared, albeit that when we talk about DNA capabilities, we have the DNA database, and again, we're working hard to consider how we can increase the specificity of DNA, utilizing things like YSTR down the male line, without getting into lots of detail about scientific procedures. But that could give us some real, much higher levels of specificity around use of DNA in particular types of investigation. So I think there are pockets of excellent innovation and creativity. I think, again, as part and parcel of bringing together BlueLight, FCN, and the Home Office in a more structured way, that will give us the opportunity to make sure we're identifying that good practice and sharing it, and also doing that with the Office of the Scientific Advisor, who I think is a really important player, certainly in terms of stimulating innovation within the market.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Meir, can I just slightly change that for you? So we have heard from previous witnesses the need to have an end-to-end process, and I've heard others have asked that question now, that actually almost some of these things you can't do them in isolation. They do need to be at the scene and then move your way through. In your framework, and the frameworks you're talking about, does that, and then the training that goes with it, is there that sort of understanding of the need for the end-to-end process?
So training isn't specifically covered in the framework, but there are standardised processes and there are standardised product codes and things. So there is also case management, so that the provider will speak to the individual commissioning force to discuss an approach to get the best outcomes. But it doesn't currently, as we said earlier, look at the full process from gathering the evidence through to the end. It is the examination part that this current framework covers. This current framework will be collapsed in 2028 in line with the new Procurement Act, which is why we're looking at the next generation and the next strategy for that. whilst we seek to look for innovation and things, we could look to include training as part of that, but it doesn't currently cover it.
Thank you. Ms Meir, do you have anything to add to this?
So yes, the framework that I was describing was in relation to the end-to-end processes you described. So the digital forensics activity that happens in a digital forensics unit is being accredited, as Dr. Gibson said, in forces for computers and mobile phones, and that is happening to ISO standards, and the FSR is reviewing that, and different forces are at different maturity levels in terms of getting accreditation for all of the various activities they perform. However, what's not currently accredited is when an officer seizes a device at an address, for example, or on somebody when they are searched, and what they may do in a police station using a kiosk where they triage and take material from that device. And what we are looking at is a pragmatic approach, because this is done by large numbers of officers and staff across policing, to ensure that they have the right framework, i.e. the right processes in place that they follow, and that will need to be supported by training for frontline staff. So all of the digital forensics units, they all have training to do the digital forensics activities that they are accredited for. What happens before it gets to the unit is now the focus of our activity, to make sure that is as consistent as it can be when delivered on quite a universal scale.
Okay, thank you.
Baroness Northover.
Now, this comes back to the earlier questions relating to unconscious bias and looking, as it were, at and for evidence in a certain way because of the role of the police here and the risk potentially of miscarriages of justice. The Westminster Commission, as you'll be aware, has said that in the long run forensic science should be removed from the supervision of the police altogether. And so I'm asking whether you feel this would be worthwhile and realistic, and what would need to happen to make this a reality. And linked to that, do you see any merit in the Scottish model, where forensic services are delivered independently, or at least arm's length from the police? And if you do see merit in that, what would need to happen in practice to establish that in England and Wales? Dr. Gibson.
Okay, thank you for the question. So, in terms of removing forensic science for the supervision of the police altogether, again, we will await the white paper that will come through, which will assist with our approach to forensic reform. That is certainly a possible model that could be delivered, and I think it's actually quite a good analogy to talk about the Scottish model, because we do work very closely with them. Clearly, the amalgamation of Police Scotland had an impact upon how, of course, forensics would then need to be configured subsequently to be able to serve all of Scotland. I mentioned earlier that the national, regional, local analogy is actually quite important, because if we take something like the Forensic Marketplace Strategic Plan, there is definitely room for national coordination, national procurement, delivery of some national services. Now, whether that would need to, get to a Police Scotland model where that's based very much upon force amalgamations, we'll wait and see what the wider police reform looks like. Now, I think there are excellent opportunities that will come through from the white paper. And that's where, as previously mentioned, we need to work very closely with the Home Office and FCN, BlueLight Commercial, and also the Police Digital Service to make sure that we actually transform forensic science. Because although I've said, well, the marketplace is operating, in an acceptable way, there are still issues like turnaround times taking too long. And, there are issues around making sure we've got resilience within the marketplace, all the things that learned colleagues have raised today that are very important, that we take opportunities to mitigate those risks in whatever the new transformation looks like. And I think we need to be ambitious with that. And I think it's a real opportunity to look forward to as to how we can transform forensic science for the future.
And Ms. Osborne, and I'm looking at the key point of independence and how the forensic scientists are looking at this and what they're asked to do, what they're commissioned to do, as it were, which is what is partly at the heart of this. What would be your comment?
I think I would agree that we've got to be ambitious, and I think we've got an opportunity now that we've got a better view of the MI in terms of that single voice. So that gives us a good starting point. And I think we've got to look at that make versus buy. We've got to look at all options as part of a commercial assessment. We've got to bear in mind value for public purse and obviously the risks, and we would explore all of that. So I wouldn't disagree with what you're saying. I think it's got to form part of development of the next strategy. We've got to be able to evidence that we've looked at all routes.
Thank you very much. Ms. Meir, is there anything you want to add to what we've just heard from your colleagues?
I would agree that police reform, and particularly the forensics reform, is an opportunity for us to look how the service is delivered, and the national, regional, and local sort of approach. I think you're always going to need local services aligned to forces, but actually the services should be aligned to the requirements of accreditation, and therefore should be consistent across the country and quality assured centrally, which can give that element of independence, albeit alignment to local forces. I think one of the challenges we have in digital forensics is not all digital forensics is delivered by forces within their forensic science departments. Some are governed through their sort of crime structures, and I think a step forward will be to ensure that these are seen as forensics disciplines that sit within a forensics portfolio, and forensics reform, I think, will enable us to mandate that and encourage the alignment with a national operating model, which I know the Director for Forensics Reform has got as a key objective.
Thank you. Baroness Young, you want to come in?
Perhaps I've missed it, but do we know what proportion of services are delivered by an accredited organisation? That includes in-house and contracted services.
Yeah, so we measure that across the forensics portfolio. Some of it, again, akin to Jayne's point, some services such as CCTV sit outside the forensics portfolio, so it's quite a complicated structure. But adherence to the code is something that's measured by the regulator, and such things as phone examination, hard disk examination. There's quite high levels of compliance, but in some areas, forces are still maturing their quality assurance processes, so there's less compliance. It was always going to be the case that it would take some time to move to a fully accredited forensic science system, and the level of work, and should I say also the cost, is significant. And I know that chiefs across the country are certainly sharing that. That said, it's a laudable introduction of something that's important to make sure that the quality of forensic science is as good as it could be and as good as it can be. But that compliance with the code across the different disciplines is something that we actively look at as part of the portfolio board. And we have a quality sub-portfolio that's led by another chief officer that actually works through that in much more detail.
Lord Burnett.
Yes, well, now my questions concern digital forensics, and so I suspect will principally be for Miss Meir. The report that the committee produced now 7 years ago noted the huge burden of digital evidence that police forces were having to cope with, and the need for research and development, and particularly the deployment of digital forensics. Then there was a strategy in 2020, I think, which was designed to deliver a transformational shift in digital forensics by 2025, i.e. by now. So the first part of my question is, do you think this has been achieved? But in part of it is a concern about the time it takes to examine digital devices. And Ms. Meir, you've already spoken to us a little bit about that. And the consequence of these devices taking a very long time, sometimes a year and more, to be examined, is that the evidence doesn't get to the CPS, charging decisions are very substantially delayed, and in the meantime the case generally is degrading. Defendants, largely on bail, are having their lives put on hold, and complainants are also suffering. So what in particular is being done at the moment to reduce the time being taken between seizing digital devices and getting the necessary information out of them to enable charging decisions to be made?
Thank you. I think it's fair to say that there's been significant work to improve the ability of forces to manage the ever-increasing number of digital devices that are seized in the criminal justice sort of process, but also the volume of material on each one of those devices. I don't think we have achieved, however, the transformational shift that we anticipated and wanted or needed when we wrote the digital forensics strategy in 2020. And that's not to say that there hasn't been innovation during that period, but there is still more to do to ensure that we get timely digital forensics evidence, as you describe. We've had a number of improvements. About a third of forces are now using cloud hosting and cloud capability to improve the timeliness of their evidence retrieval and review. And we've also got a third of forces who are using automation technologies to review large swathes of digital material and triage information so that they can identify criminal material within a device much quicker. But that does mean we've still got a varying level of maturity across forces, because a number of forces have not been able to deploy those technologies to date, and there's a variety of reasons for that. What we do expect now with the establishment of the Home Office Director of Forensics is an ability to look at what is working well in policing. So the third of forces that are using these technologies, what's the barrier to delivery across the remaining forces, and how can we support them to do that? You talk about the amount of digital evidence that is awaiting review and the delays that occur. I think the HMIC reviewed forces in 2022, and since then the number of devices, I'd say, are about the same that are waiting for review. On one hand, that's showing some improvement because the number of devices and the volume in those devices is ever increasing, but is definitely not where we would want to be in terms of improving the timeliness of that evidence gathering and submission into the evidence process. So there are a number of initiatives underway. Some of that is about ensuring that the automation tools that are used in some forces are now available on a framework, and that should be in place in the spring so that more forces can procure those more readily and more cost effectively. What we are also doing is we have a national performance framework now that is in its second year of development. This is allowing forces to see what is working well in terms of the construct of their digital forensics units. And then we are also working with the forensic science regulator to make sure that the end-to-end process is as efficient, because as Dr. Gibson said, some of the activities around accreditation can be laborious and slow, and we are looking to create as much efficiencies in those processes as we can do. And what we also have done is the College of Policing has refreshed its digital investigation training to help to identify opportunities to hone down on actually what is the digital investigation strategy for every crime investigation, because some of the challenges we have is that officers will take every digital device at a scene, submit it all into their digital forensics unit and ask for them all to be examined pretty much concurrently. What we really need to understand is what evidence are you looking for from what device and why, which can really narrow down and use your finite digital forensics capability to really identify the evidence that's necessary. So there are a number of improvements that have been made, but we are a way off the sort of transformational shift that we need. But I am confident that with the Home Office Director now appointed, we've got a real opportunity to see what is working and design a future operating model that will see those backlogs reduced.
Can I just pick you up on one tiny point? You mentioned that the search is for criminal material. Can we be reassured that the search is also for exculpatory material?
Absolutely. But what we are seeking to do in the first instance is to make sure that devices, potentially if we've seized devices from a family, that we're quite quick to be able to identify those that do have material of interest, for example, child sexual abuse material, and those that do not. And the digital triage tools that we have will look at a device and say, this is where the material is, and this is where the material isn't. But it is all available, as you say, to demonstrate the exculpatory material as well as the criminal material that we are looking for.
Thank you.
Could I just follow up on Lord Burnett's question? You yourself have referred to the Her Majesty's Inspectors of Constabulary's Fire and Rescue Services report in 2022, where they talked about the difficulty for victims. And they said, I'm quoting, too often victims are being let down by a postcode lottery. Their experience depends too heavily on the force area they live in. The time period for forces to start examining devices varies widely. Better performing forces start within weeks, whereas others start within 18 months. This gulf in performance cannot continue. That was written in 2022. Do you now feel that problem is being largely solved? The postcode lottery problem?
No, I wouldn't say. I wouldn't say it's solved. No, but I would say that we have a better understanding through the National Performance Framework, and that forces are looking to reduce the gap between the highest performing forces and the lowest performing forces. What we do know is investment in digital forensics is difficult because of the size and scale that forces have and the various different funding positions that they find themselves in. Some forces have been able to invest in cloud hosting, cloud storage, and expensive automation tools. Others have not been able to do so as quickly, and that is where we are working with both BlueLight Commercial, try and bring down the cost of some of the software tools, but also to work with the Director for Forensics Reform to identify an opportunity where forces can be on the same sort of playing field as such in terms of being able to deliver the service to victims.
Is it still the case that in some parts of the country they have to wait 18 months before the examining of devices actually starts? Is that still the case?
As I said earlier, in terms of the volume of cases, all cases will be triaged and understood in terms of the value that they have in the investigation. And if there is a case that is a priority case, then all forces will be able to respond to that. There may be some examples where computers may be waiting a number of months, certainly over 12 months, but that is not necessarily an average figure. It is a lower priority case, or it may be a computer device that's not been seen as a priority within one investigation. There may be 30 phones, for example. You may do the first 10 and then move through and then do the next 10 and then the last 10 prior to any final charging decisions. But it is fair to say that in some forces we are waiting a number of months, and that length of time is unacceptable in terms of our future expectations.
Okay, thank you. Lord Borwick.
There's an increasing risk of fake digital evidence. One of the great skills of policemen is to be able to have a gut feel as to whether a witness or a criminal is telling the truth to you. How are you going to do this with digital AI systems which have been known to invent pieces of ideas in the past?
I think this is one of the sort of significant and emerging risks to digital forensics sort of processes to identify fake digital evidence, and we see that both in terms of video evidence but also audio evidence. There's an absolute recognition between policing and the Home Office and other partners that our ability to identify deep fake within any digital material is at a critical point, but also that all of the AI risks to the criminal justice system are reviewed. So we're currently, there's a task and finish group led by the Home Office, which is looking into research of deepfake detection. There is processes in place to start to look at risk monitoring and understand from both forces, the criminal justice, the criminal prosecution service, where we have maybe seen issues around deep fakes being into the evidence chain, and we're also looking to see what kind of crimes are going to be at the highest risk from AI. There are a number of pieces of work that are going on with academia to identify deep fakes within digital material, and that work sort of continues. We have both synthetically generated material, but we also have falsified digital evidence, and seeing the difference between those and ensuring that our digital forensics experts have got tools to identify that is going to be essential in the future. But it's not just video, there's also audio that is particularly challenging also.
It must be a common problem around the world, particularly in America, where AI is even stronger than it is over here. Do the Americans have any better ways of detecting this than we do?
We're certainly working with Interpol, and we're aware of the work that's going on across the world to try and combat this kind of emerging threat. And it will be absolutely a sort of an international joint effort to keep pace with the type of technologies that you're describing.
It sounds a very nearly impossible task. Are you confident that we'll succeed?
Well, I hope not. I think we have to be right for the challenge. Fortunately, we do have some good seats of academic research across the country and obviously internationally that is looking to keep pace and respond. But it is a challenge, but it is also about making sure that there is that critical thinking and review of our evidence and not just taking what we see on face value. And I think that's where the forensics aspect of the work that we do is so critical, to make sure that this is clear evidence and not fake material.
I think we're going to have the opportunity of hearing more about digital forensics research in our next session.
Indeed, sir.
So, Lord Berkeley, we're going to ask you some questions now about evidence storage.
Yes, thank you, Chair. We understand now that police forces are put in charge of storing physical evidence, but we've often heard that the process is underfunded and inconsistent, mainly due to the large volumes involved. The NPCC has produced a guidance on how evidence should be collected from the crime scenes, as well as stored and retained, but we've also heard that this guidance is inconsistently followed. Now, this may be linked to the previous question asked by my friend, Noble Lord Burnett, but how can you ensure that this guidance for the storage of evidence is actually followed, and do something about it if it's not? I don't know which of you is...
Dr. Gibson, perhaps. Would you like to start?
Meir, but maybe...
Yeah, I'm happy to start, Chair, if that's okay. So in terms of the storage of exhibits, then this is in part stored within forces, as you say. There's also an element of physical forensic exhibits and digital forensic exhibits that will be stored with suppliers for the duration that they're there. And we also have what is called a FAL, which is our archive, where there are also considerable numbers of forensic exhibits that are stored as well. Now, the FCN has certainly been involved in through the standardisation and efficiency work stream in making sure that there are consistent protocols with regard to how forensic evidence is stored. And any risk is monitored again through my MPCC Forensic Portfolio Board, where I have the sub-leads from Quality Marketplace, Digital Forensics and Fingerprints, and other modalities that will actually feed in and raise any issues that there are. Now, each force is responsible for its own forensic delivery in terms of the storage of what is in force, and that is a matter for them, albeit, as I've mentioned, there are now standard policies in terms of asking forces to adhere to a consistent approach. Obviously, when it involves statutory requirements and the continuity evidence and the chain of evidence for court and criminal justice processes, of course, that's important as well. Obviously, we're talking physical forensic exhibits, but also digital forensic exhibits. And Jayne mentioned earlier with regard to, how do you store considerable levels of digital material? And this ranged from the early days of, cupboards and cupboards full of hard drives, that some of which you are required to keep for 100 years. But we are now moving into cloud technology, where storage is via the cloud, and there's obviously cost to retrieve that stored material when it is required. I would go back to an earlier point around the digital side of the business, in that different forces are in different places. So there's a scalar of advancement around use of cloud and other digital forensic tools and technologies. Now, that to some degree is related to how well a force is resourced, although it's not entirely. But I would go back to the opportunity of transformation in the fact that what we need to be able to do is look at the forces across England and Wales, consider this real divergence of use of different technologies, and how we start to knit that together into a cohesive national approach where it is required. Now, I don't underestimate the complexity of that, but what I would say is it's equally, a significant opportunity where we can actually start to reduce the postcode lottery that's been described, both against the examination and delivery of justice to victims, and also, to the archiving and storage of forensics exhibits as for this particular question. So I hope that helps.
It sounds to me to be a recipe for chaos.
Ms. Meir, do you want to add anything about the forensic side? The digital side of storage that we've heard from Dr. Gibson?
Well, I would completely agree. At the moment, digital material has previously been stored on hard drives and or servers within police forces. As the amount of digital material continues to grow, there has to be a solution that is more flexible and able to reduce the burden on forces to maintain complex sort of server systems within their own forces. What we do know, though, about cloud storage, it can be costly to retrieve the evidence, as Dr. Gibson mentioned, and we need to make sure that whatever solution we we design for policing. It is cost effective, it is secure, and it ensures that there is a consistent approach across the country, which I think that the cloud now gives us in a way that we didn't have. We didn't have an obvious national solution sort of 5 or 6 years ago, whereas I think now we are moving into a scenario where forces are proving the concept, and we have a better model to prove what's effective, and work with the Director for Forensics Reform to design and implement that across the country.
Thank you. As you can see, we've got many questions for you, and time is running out, so I'm going to ask the members of the committee to be as brief as they can in their questions, and perhaps you could be brief as well. Lord Burnett.
Well, I have a short question that could admit of a rather long answer, and it's simply that the quality of forensic evidence generally depends upon the quality of investigation at a crime scene. And my interest is in what training those who are crime scene investigators get. Now, Chair, I don't know whether it would be better to ask for a 1 or 2 sentence answer from Dr. Gibson in particular, and then perhaps invite Dr. Gibson or whoever is responsible to put in a short note afterwards. Otherwise, we may not get to our next
I think that's an excellent suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah, the very short answer is that our CSIs are accredited, or we're certainly working towards accreditation through ISO standards, so international standards. I think that's really important in making sure that their recovery from crime scenes is consistent and has integrity. What I would say is actually we're also linked to the wider investigative kind of realm as well, because actually when we get a result, that then links into the quality of investigation of the wider kind of case to make sure that we get to a good solution for victims and gain justice for victims, of course.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Viscount Stansgate.
Well, I have a slightly longer question, but I'd rather appreciate a shorter answer, if that's all right with you. It is this. Given that many cases are collapsing due to missing, lost, damaged evidence, do you think it's time to take the burden away from the police altogether through reopening a national forensic archive? And what do you think is needed to ensure a proper archiving of evidence? And given the what we've heard about the need to get accredited and follow regulations set out by the Forensic Science Regulator, is it something that you recognise? I mean, I think more interesting would be to tackle this question of whether it should be taken away from the police altogether and put separately, this whole question of storage in archives, which is a very big and growing problem.
So, Dr. Gibson, would you like to start on that?
Yeah, I can't give you the precise figures around number of cases that are collapsing due to missing or lost evidence, but I would add to that possibly delayed evidence. That may well be an issue, and that's something that we actively monitor through the portfolio. But the forensic archive is open and operating. It's linked into the Home Office. We've worked very closely with it, and this holds a great deal of material already on behalf of forces.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, could the witness answer the question just posed about whether it should be kept separate?
Well, the question of whether it should be taken from outside the police and dealt with completely separately.
Well, I think, obviously, with regard to the end-to-end process that we've discussed, then we have to have some element of exhibits sitting within the police, because that's where they're collected from, and that's where the initial submissions are made, depending on which route they then take through the forensic science system. In terms of separation, then there is the possibility that the forensic archive could be extended to be much bigger. I think it's a question of where the status of the investigation is, because it could be collection point, it could be analysis point, it could be investigation point, or it could be archive after case point. So I think you'd have to look at those different phases to work out where the best benefit would be in terms of separation.
Is there any new material going into the forensic archive, or is it?
Yes, as far as I'm aware. Well, there's obviously historic evidence that's there from the old Forensic Science Service, but there is still the capacity to be able to store forensic samples within the archive.
The new material is going into the forensic archive.
As far as I'm aware, I can't give you a volume though, but I could actually make some investigations if that would be helpful.
And the final point, Viscount Stansgate's question about accreditation regulation.
Yes, so in terms of accreditation, hopefully we've covered that for colleagues sufficiently, but accreditation applies to policing elements of forensic science, but also to providers as well. I think we've covered off the point that it's actually very, very comprehensive in terms of what you need to do.
Yes.
And when you get inspected, you can sometimes get hundreds of actions to be able to follow up to make sure that you are complying with the codes. So we are working with the regulator to make that as proportionate as possible, but it is important to make sure that the integrity of the evidence is where it needs to be.
Okay, well, we're reaching almost the end. Baroness Moberger.
So very quickly, because we're running very late, but would each of you give me an example of one of the things that if you were in the position of writing the report we're going to be writing, you would recommend to government to improve the forensics within England and Wales?
What are your top priorities?
Top priorities, one each. Dr. Gibson.
Investment, so that we can actually start to progress national systems, which will eventually lead to invest to save. So it'll save over the long term, but it needs upfront investment to be able to kick it off.
Meir.
Using the opportunity of the Director for Forensics Reform to standardise a national operating model for digital forensics.
Wonderful. Ms. Osborne.
Continuation of the national approach and a development of a commercial strategy across both physical and digital.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, all three of you. You've answered many, many questions from us. We're very grateful. It's been extremely informative. So we're now going to pause for a couple of minutes to bring in the next panel. Thank you very much. We're starting our second session with three witnesses. We have Professor Sarah Morris, Professor of Digital Forensics at the University of Southampton, Jake Moore from Global Cybersecurity Advisor in ESET, and Steve Rick, who's CEO of Forensic Analytics. You're all very welcome. As you know, we are looking into forensic science and its importance to the criminal justice system in England and Wales. And in particular, we're interested in, for this session, in digital forensics and AI. So by way of introduction, perhaps you could each outline your own experience and your role in digital forensics. And what we'd really like to know is what you make of the huge increase in the demand for digital forensics, and how do you think things have improved since 2019, when we did our last inquiry, when we were at that stage concerned about the rapid rise in digital forensics. So, Professor Morris, why don't you start, please?
Thank you, and good morning. So I'm a professor of digital forensics at the University of Southampton. I've been there 3 years now. Before that, I was at Cranfield University for most of my career. As well as doing traditional academic work, I also do operational activities with police and other agencies, both in the UK and across the world. I run a lab called Sherfox Labs that is mostly practitioners, where we do casework research and run CPD for law enforcement. I have a PhD in digital forensics and an undergraduate degree in AI. And I'm proud to be a Churchill Fellow this year, looking at the impact of mental health for digital forensic practitioners, and I'll be going over to America next year to explore what they're doing and why their retention is so much better in that space. In terms of the landscape, if I may, I feel there's a lot of changes, some positive, mostly negative, I'm afraid. I feel that accreditation in particular has forced out a lot of the practitioners that I worked with 6 years ago, either through not being able to afford it, through it taking too much time, or for those that can't afford it, the sole traders, the fact that they can't get insurance to cover moving forward. There is a broader range of devices that I know we're going to come on to, and that's impacting where people are going and the amount of work, the amount of tools needed, and the amount of technical skills required. There's also a massive mental health problem in digital forensics, where we are losing people, both people that have started and don't realise what they're going to have to see, and those that have been doing it a long time and eventually can't take it anymore, and sadly sometimes that ends with people taking their own lives. Hence my decision to apply and receive a Churchill Fellowship. I do think, though, in summary, that there's a couple of really positives that I would like to bring out in terms of landscape changes since I was here 6 years ago. And I think the introduction of a Chief Scientific Advisor for Policing is one of the most positive in terms of really bringing forward that science and technology profession and bringing forward how we're considering science and technology in policing and forensics. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Jake, would you like to start?
So I spent 14 years in Dorset Police. I spent 10 of those years in the digital forensics unit. The last 2 years in that unit, I led a team of fantastic forensic examiners. I then joined the cybercrime team as it started, where we were learning as we went, incorporating all things to do with forensics and cybercrime in terms of the police and how we could best protect the public. But echoing what Professor Morris said about people leaving the service, I did leave the police force and joined an international cybersecurity company purely because I wanted to best protect the public, because I felt that protection and prevention was better than, unfortunately, locating evidence and putting people through court, because my time at court was notably less than when I first started in that department. I have been in major crime cases, high-profile cases, and now, though, I emphasise anything to do with studying what I call future crimes. So I spend a lot of my time researching AI, in particular deepfakes, and then educating people in my work, in particular businesses, but the public as well, in terms of their understanding and what to look for in this very improving area of technology. But the landscape is underfunded. We've seen this. Of course, there is little in resources and money, and two, with the education that is there with police forces up and down the country, still struggling with the lack of resources and particularly that money as well.
Okay, thank you. We'll be coming to that, I'm sure. Steve Rick.
Well, Chair, members of the committee, thank you for inviting me and having the opportunity to contribute. I'm conscious we sit between you and lunch, so you obviously need to be...
Don't worry about that.
Let me talk a little bit about forensic analytics, because we're quite a bit of a niche business, but the real epicentre of digital forensics. Forensic analytics is UK-based. We're founded in 2013, so we're still quite young. It was essentially three men in a garage, and I am not joking. Owned by our founders and staff, and we're headquartered in Letchworth in Hertfordshire, although we do have an office in Edinburgh where I am based. We employ 70 people, all data scientists, technologists and other professionals, mainly with most of them who have a law enforcement background. The firm specialises in digital forensics and in particular digital forensics as it's related to mobile phones and cell site analysis, which is a large part of many cases. We provide digital forensic software, which we create ourselves, and it's used by the majority of police forces in the UK. And I would challenge one of the previous witnesses to say that it's expensive. It is not. And I can say a little bit more about that. We also provide forensic radio frequency surveying tools, and I was in Australia last 2 weeks, and in all the cities I was in, we undertook radio frequency surveys for the police forces there. We also provide professional services, and this includes providing expert witnesses, again, predominantly for the prosecution, but we also do work on behalf of the defence. Our services include creating the forensic software, most notably our CSAS software, and we provide City and Guilds accredited training to over 2,500 police officers, digital media investigators and analysts every year. Increasingly, we are also providing training in the USA to law enforcement agencies, in particular district attorneys, and Australia, where I've been for the last couple of weeks. Our forensic services predominantly are the expert witness testimony in court for complex digital evidence cases, data interpretation from call data records and network logs. One case we looked at when I was in Hobart on Friday morning had 1 million lines of data in it, so I can say a bit more about that. So it just gives you an idea of the scale.
Thank you.
Cell site mapping and geolocation analysis for criminal investigations, again, it's widely used. Independent case reviews, so we provide a lot of reviews of policing evidence before it goes to court. Beyond services, we also play a pivotal role in shaping the industry standards as a founding member of the Association of Digital Forensic Science Providers, or ADFSP. It's a bit of a mouthful. But it's a collaboration of all the providers of digital evidence in the United Kingdom. We also collaborate with academia, including University College London. I know Ruth Morgan presented evidence to committee quite recently.
I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt you. Can you be a bit brief? We've got a lot of questions for you.
I think probably the most important thing for me to talk about, I know you're going to talk about accreditation and regulation, I can cover that later, but I think market realities and sustainability I think is really quite important. It is still constrained since 2019, recommendations that this committee made, and progress has been limited, partly due to external factors like COVID, but procurement is in many cases painfully slow and disjointed, and I have plenty of examples of that even in the last couple of weeks. Our unique situation as a software and service provider makes it possible for us to deliver the forensic services at market rates, but heavily subsidised by our internally mutually reinforcing model of developing the software, selling the software, and providing the expert witness services.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm sorry to
Not at all.
speed you along there. Baroness Young.
I remember the day that we went to see the Met Police during the last inquiry and saw room after room of blokes staring at screens, and that was the digital service. How has that changed? And what more needs done to ensure that collection of data, storage of data, availability of data, and analysis of data is as modern as possible? And from your international experience, which countries do that well?
Let me start with the second part of that question, Baroness Young. First, I think in the UK we do have a habit of getting the hair shirt on and having a damn good wriggle around in it. I think from my experience, particularly in the United States and most recently in Australia, I would say that the UK is quite a long way ahead of what's going on in the US and Australia. In Australia, they predominantly still use Excel spreadsheets, Google Maps, highlighter pens, and so on. I think the Met, if I come back to that, they are a customer of ours, one of our largest customers. I'd say the first part of your question, I don't think you'll see it's a lot of blokes anymore. I think it's probably more gender. The gender split is equal. They are very advanced users of digital forensic technology. I think the recent work they've done with facial recognition cameras is a really good case in point, and that is to be commended. The way they use our software, they've been using our software for a number of years, and what we've seen is the emergence of two classes of users within large forces, and I'll take Metropolitan Police as one example, is that you have the digital media investigators. These are warrant card carrying officers who will often triage, a bit like Jake was in a previous life, triaging cases and coming to conclusions very quickly. And that has allowed the analysts in a unit called MO2, which is staffed by hugely experienced and high-quality analysts, to undertake work on the more complex cases. What it's allowed the Met to do, I would commend to you two case studies that have been well written and well presented at College of Policing's website. One is Operation Atlas, which is the pursuit of perpetrators of violence against women and girls, and particularly stalking and harassment, where previously charge rates were running at around about 6%. And they've now driven those charge rates up dramatically beyond 55, 60%, and in some cases even higher than that. And that's achieved by relatively young and inexperienced officers having access to digital forensic tools like our CSAS to be able to undertake the investigation and actually be able to have the perpetrator in custody suite, and within an hour or two be able to get a charge. And charging rates are going through the roof. The same is true on it's called Operachi, which I think all of you will be familiar with, is about county lines, drug gangs. They have a stunning track record, and a number of other police forces collaborate on this as well.
Could turn to Professor Morris and Jake. Is that your verdict, or do you have a different perspective?
I think the Met is an interesting example of an approach, but I think it is still a very disjointed ecosystem across the different police forces, particularly with the ability to store both data and hardware, so the digital devices. Whilst mobile phones are quite small to store, when you're talking about big tower PCs or pieces from vehicles, alarm systems, these require physical storage that is suitable for a digital device to keep it both secure and in good condition. Then you've got the actual data where no one's deleting anything anymore, we're just keeping more and more, so there is more to go through. People are bringing more and more devices to you, but saying about prioritization, which is creating more of a backlog. So I think the Met is an example, yes, but I think in some, particularly the smaller forces or the less funded, it's a very different story.
Jake, would you like to comment?
Yeah, there's been a huge increase in investment in triage, where we would try to get the data off relatively quickly, but you are continually battling with the tech companies, Apple and Android, where encryption of said phones are increasingly more proactive for the user, and therefore to triage a device immediately and within 24 hours can be very challenging, even with the help of GCHQ. Generally, we have to wait until it's been effectively jailbroken, which is when you're able to get through that operating system, but that takes time. But like we've heard, the more and more data we keep, it generates more terabytes, so large amounts of space. We have to store that somewhere. That's expensive. I don't think that should be a cost we should even be considering as an option. That should be a given. We need to store that data. But triage looks at data that effectively hasn't been deleted yet, so that's a quick process. But storing data, going through deleted data, if it is there, that requires huge amounts of space. However, the biggest problem we've seen in the last few years has to be encryption. It has caused huge headaches for police forces, the Met, whoever, it doesn't matter, all over the world. Encryption is a good thing. We need encryption. Without it, we haven't got the internet. But it's equally battling for those who are not going to give away codes to open those devices, because they understand that by opening those hard drives and other devices, it will be worse for them than just keeping quiet.
Ernest Walmsley, I think our witnesses have answered the questions on storage of data.
It pretty well has, but just a very little one. You talked about encryption, and obviously that can be a problem when you're going after the bad guys. But there's also a privacy issue for non-criminal members of the public. How do you manage to untangle the two?
Well, first of all, brilliant question. And this is a balancing act. However, we need to be offering such encryption to all devices to keep that privacy first. If there's anything spoken about what we would call normally a backdoor, then we break the trust and the privacy and the security of those channels, whether it be communication or stored data. So we cannot allow anyone to have that backdoor, because if we as the good guys are able to be given that key to open such data, you are putting at risk hugely the criminals who will no doubt inevitably abuse that entry point.
Thank you.
Okay, Stansgate.
My question is specifically to Professor Morris. Much of your research has focused on the wide range of devices that need to be analysed. Now, how can digital forensics possibly keep up with the shifting landscape, the development of new devices, the umpteen million software upgrades every day, and the world in which we now live?
Very good question. And it's hard, and it's one of the reasons why the majority of digital forensics is firefighting on things as they come up, because you can't possibly cover all the devices, all the updates, all the changes. There are too many. Digital devices are everywhere now. I'm in a fortunate position that when people come to me to ask me to do a case for them, it's normally the weird or the wonderful. So I get the washing machines or the adult devices and things. I don't tend to get the run-of-the-mill mobile phones. But I do think, given the breadth of the landscape, there's a couple of dangers. There's a danger that we are becoming very tool reliant in some areas, and tools won't cover the breadth of devices, particularly the cheaper devices that you can get that are the less named brands, and won't keep up with the updates. But also that we tend to focus on a particular kind of device. So mobile forensics, as we've heard, is incredibly big and should be, but not at the expense of other areas. So we've started seeing more from Ring doorbells or doorbells in general, general, and alarm systems and home assistance. These all provide valuable evidence depending on the kind of crime or the kind of investigation we're doing. So I guess what I'm saying is it's got to be dependent on the case. I don't think you could cover everything all the time and keep up. Not enough hours in the day, I'm afraid.
Okay.
Lord Stern.
Thank you very much. You've already touched on some aspects of the question, but what we're trying to understand is how much and how is it chosen is done inside, and when the choice is made to go outside, how does the market work for those outside supplies? And I think you heard earlier that for the physical side, there's a problem of market domination, and we were told that for the digital side, a bigger proportion was done in-house. I hope that's a reasonable description, but given that description, how do you think the market on the digital side works? It does seem that there are a rather larger number of suppliers, but a smaller fraction of the demand is sent outside.
I think if I can tackle that first, I think from our experience, it's made up of a lot of companies like ours, small to medium-sized enterprises. It's lots of niche within digital forensics. There's not one sort of there's not one category. In our original specialisation was in the analysis of data from cellular phones. That then started bringing in things like vehicle telemetry. Every car now has multiple SIM cards in them and so on. It also includes bringing in other data types like ANPR camera data. There are other digital forensics businesses out there. I mean, you've heard reference to the kiosks that are widely used. There are principally two or three major international providers of those. Magnet, Celebrite, MSAB are well-known providers. And then there are other providers who look into the work that Sarah and her team research. In our area of expertise, worldwide, there are probably only about six companies that are able to provide the software to undertake the analysis of vast volumes of data held on cellular phones. And in fact, I think we are the only ones who are...
It is genuinely a world market, so a police force would have a look around, see what's possible, and go to US or wherever.
Yeah, I mean we've had a couple of examples in the UK where they've the operating model in the United States is very different to that in the UK, and we have representation on the two they don't exactly have standard bodies like we do in the United Kingdom. They don't have a forensic regulator, but they do have two specialist groups. They have the Scientific Working Group for Digital Evidence, which meets 2 or 3 times a year. We have two of our founders have been drafted onto that, and they also have something called the International Association, or the International Association of Chiefs of Police, which is largely, although it has international at the front end, is largely American. Again, we have representation on the standards, technical standards group of that. The American providers tend to, they won't back their product from crime scene to courtroom. They don't have, like, providers in the UK, they don't have that, if you like, that forensic evidential capability. So it tends to be incredibly variable.
You hazard...
I need to check with Professor Morris and Jake Moore. Do you think that the police force should be contracting out more on the digital front?
For me, it's a budgeting issue. It's extremely expensive. From when we used to outsource, it was usually to do with capacity surges. So maybe there have been many people in a gang or a particular group that have been arrested, and all of their devices need imaging, which is searching through. But each device would come with a cost. There may be some sort of deal with with more items, but of course it is extremely costly. And there is a mixed house of in-house police units across the UK, so it can be different throughout forces depending on how big each force is. In particular, Dorset was a very small force, so we only really had a very small number of examiners. So when we were to say have a particular high-profile murder, we would have a lot of support from around the UK, but we would very rarely go out of the UK for such extra help.
Would you hazard a guess as to what extent the police forces handle digital forensic evidence in-house as opposed to contracted out? Very roughly, what do
10% would go out outsourced.
10% go out.
agree with that.
Okay, thank you. The next, Lord Burnett.
Yes, you've described a little how the system works, but the reality is that for digital forensics you need highly trained, highly experienced and capable experts, individuals who are well able to learn new things on an almost daily basis. You're not the only part of the digital ecosystem that is trawling in the market for people with those skills. So really my question is whether digital forensics are able to attract suitable talent. Are you able to pay well enough, given that there are other, I suspect, much richer organisations looking for comparable talent? And I'm interested not only in what happens in the private sector, but also in the police. So but perhaps start with Professor Morris from the academic, but morphing into the private sector perspective.
I mean, the students that I teach that want to go into digital forensics are often not cost motivated. They're excited often by what they've seen on TV or what they think the investigations are going to involve. That often the aspiration is to go into policing first. For those that meet the security requirements, they will do so. Even though this is a lower financial reward than they could get elsewhere, potentially in industry. I think the problem is then that we have to put them through a variety of very expensive certification and training that makes them very poachable by industry, who can offer substantially more in terms of pay and other benefits than policing. So often I'll see people go in for a few years and then move to industry and do work in the private sector. I also think, again, coming back to that mental health, whilst we can attract them, they don't necessarily understand what they're getting when they go in. There is no amount of preparation for some of the awful things that we have to see. Simply being told that you're going to see bad things, that you're going to see abusive images, does not prepare you for the reality. And I think that impact of not just illegal things that you're seeing, but you're going to see a lot of legal material and a lot of cases where someone is not wholly a horrible person. You know, you'll see good and bad and realise that these could be just normal humans on the street, and that impacts their retention. And I think retention is as much a problem as attraction.
Thank you. Mr. Moore next, perhaps.
Yeah, to really add on from what Professor Morris said, and I have been there in the police force and I did move to industry, but for a few reasons. And I think pay, of course, could be improved. It may sit better at a different scoring system. With the typical police staff system, for example, it's done through letters of the alphabet and it doesn't have much movement. I think we could move away from that. But there is so much competition in the tech industry for those skilled practitioners. However, like what Professor Morris was saying, there are other reasons, other motivating factors to be why you would want to join it. For me, it was exciting. There was a very wonderful buzz that you'd have in the police force, especially when there's a high-profile case that you're part of. That in itself is worth money to people that I was working with, because that excitement, maybe not as fast-paced as what we're seeing in the movies, but it's to be part of it. And that, in effect, can allow for some wriggle room in the pay. But
job satisfaction is the answer.
Pardon? But to move on, there is potentially only a length you can work on, say, frontline digital forensics. When you are viewing extreme material, it only has a certain amount of time before you do have to move on. And as there is very little progression in career and pay in police forensics, then it seemingly pushes people into industry. But they're at a time when they're wanting to improve their pay, so it tends to be a young person's position. So rather than retaining people, because I don't think we will be able to past a certain age, and when they're wanting to be looking for very high amounts of money, it's about getting the right people in, but continuing with those courses that are on offer. They're fantastic. The courses that I was given for free were excellent, and that is something that industry doesn't always maintain or even offer. So it's about that balance. But the excitement of forensics, there's not much else that can offer that delivery.
Thank you. Mr. Rick, very briefly, anything to add on that point?
Two things. I think, first of all, our staff come from two areas. One, we often get police officers who've done their 30 years service. They can't add much more to their pension, and they're looking for something that is aligned to policing. So we've got a number of our staff come from that area. We've got a small number, but an important number of younger police officers who found the shift systems and the changes of leadership quite difficult to cope with, and despite my best efforts to persuade them otherwise of coming into the private sector was challenging, and there were high risks. They joined us and have made a big contribution. The other thing is we work very closely with Anglia Ruskin University and UCL, and we provide placements for master's students, and we've hired a few of them as well, and that is refreshing the talent pool. In terms of pay, I think I'd agree with what Jake says. It is very much a purpose-driven. We're a purpose-driven organisation with a strong ethos of public service. So I think we don't attract people who are motivated purely by cash.
Yes, well, thank you. That's reassuring to hear. I have a discrete question for you, Mr. Rick, which now concerns accreditation. And we're interested to know how accreditation works, and particularly because we understand your company went through the process relatively recently. Why did you do it, and how did you find it? Are other companies doing it, and does it present a barrier to new entrants and smaller companies? Think back to your time when there were three of you in a garage to trying to get the accreditation.
Yes, when I made the decision that we would pursue it, I was not the most popular person in the business.
And that's because it's time-consuming and expensive.
It's time-consuming, but it is absolutely essential. I think if you ask the 900-odd sub-postmasters who were caught up in the Post Office Horizon scandal, I think they would probably agree that the quality of digital evidence that was submitted was fundamentally flawed, as were the investigations. So I think accreditation is absolutely essential. It's for heaven's sake, it was the legislation was published back in 2021. We had numerous consultations. Everyone had plenty of time to get their act together, and I think a lot of people stuck their heads in the sand and hoped it would go away. Three of our partner organisations who specialise in expert witness services and cell site analysis for geolocation, they were part of the pilot scheme, and we worked very closely with them and started to understand some of the challenges. What it forced us to do was write everything down, have standard operating procedures, have standard operating models, test, retest, and for the scientists in the room, achieving test-retest reliability result based on ground truth data that we shared with a number of police forces was absolutely essential. It means that that our customers, the police forces, can have confidence in the software and tools that we're using and the outputs. In terms of police forces, I think the analytics lead for the MPCC is the best person to ask, but to the best of my knowledge, certainly whilst they have the wet forensics is generally compliant with the Forensic Regulator Code, digital forensics is not. To the best of my knowledge, no police force in the United Kingdom, or sort of England and Wales, which is the remit of this committee, has pursued accreditation to what's called DIG 200, which is the cell site analysis and geolocation, which is used, I would say, in probably 99% of cases where digital evidence is used in the UK. Amongst the providers, I know that four of the private sector providers have secured it, and there are another 5 that are actively pursuing it, and that's it.
Thank you.
Anna Swansea.
Now we move to equality of arms issues. So I'd like to ask, to what extent is digital forensics well understood in the criminal justice system, lawyers, judges, police, and even juries? You may have heard earlier, we've heard of real issues in physical forensics around a lack of equality of arms between the prosecution and defence. So can I ask, do you see similar issues in the digital space? And is it possible to say how often are digital forensics experts requested by defence teams? Perhaps you could go first, Steve.
I would say in a majority of cases they are. So I think the private sector providers out there, they work predominantly on defence. And one of the things that does happen, and it is encouraging, the defence barristers or defence lawyers and Crown Prosecution Service come together to evaluate the body of evidence and agree what is submissible and what is not, and that helps enormously. And in terms of the balance of power, we run. I've lost count now, but I think this year alone we've probably run about 20 continuous professional development events in collaboration with various police force customers around the UK, and into that are invited members from the CPS and other barrister chambers and so on. So I think there is a better understanding of what is happening, but it is constantly evolving.
And what about juries? We heard something rather concerning, that the summary of the evidence, 1 or 2 pages, maybe summarising 20 or 30 pages, is written by non-specialists, and that's what the juries get. Is that a problem?
I can only speak for what our niche, and I must emphasise the analysis of call data records, geolocation service is a niche. Important, but still a niche. What our software does is it generates what are called fast time reports that are put into plain English. So a big part of our pursuit is to try and make it understandable by lay people. So you don't have to have a deep technical understanding.
Oh, I see. So it is experts producing the summary.
Absolutely.
And checking that.
And before it goes to, we're working on some very complex cases at the moment, and everything is peer reviewed internally. And where we have reason for doubt or reason for concern, we will draft in other specialists to review the evidence.
Do you check it out with ordinary people, off jury, as it were? To see if they really understand?
I think you probably better address my wife on this, but but we do use friends and family to say, does this make sense? But the reality of it is we've got enough people in the organisation with different skill sets who may not understand what is.
Any comments from the other witnesses?
I'd like to just add on from that it's very niche to find digital forensics examiners and specialists who can cut through the noise to explain something very complex in a short summary, succinctly, to an audience that might be widely ranging. And that, as we'll come on to later, is potentially one of the fortes of AI, which can do such processes for those individuals who need to divulge such information in that shortened way, because that's why you're hearing that non-specialists are doing it, because they are the ones that need to be able to explain it in that way.
Professor Morris, add anything?
I would say I agree wholeheartedly with what Stephen Jacobs said. With regard particularly to the niche environment, I think I worry about the wider digital forensics, so your traditional computers and things. As I said at the beginning in my opening, I have lost many colleagues who are sole traders who worked predominantly for the defence, who now cannot or feel they cannot stay in the industry because they can't afford to go for accreditation. They're struggling to get insurance for their business because they're not accredited, because legal aid rates are low, pay is unpredictable, and if you're a sole trader, obviously that's a high risk for them. And also lonely and no kind of support for them. I think I do agree that there are better understanding, but often when I go and talk to people about computers, people think that because they use a computer, they understand it perhaps more than they actually do, which I feel that my colleagues in other forensic disciplines don't have that trouble because you're not doing DNA analysis and things all the time. So yeah.
Lord Berkeley.
Thank you, Chair. One of the concerns which led us to the committee to go for this inquiry is a sort of story that bad forensic science can lead to miscarriages of justice. Do you see a risk in this? And is it what can be done about it? It's developing so rapidly that it's an important issue to address, I think. But is there any evidence that it has led to miscarriages of justice?
I think if I could take that first, Lord Berkeley. I think in Denmark a number of years ago, 8,000 odd cases were thrown out because of
8,000.
Around about 8,000. I can give you off the top of my head. I can't remember which date exactly when it was, but roughly 8,000 cases were thrown out because of faulty digital evidence, largely derived from phones. It was in the news yesterday with the MPCC are undertaking an investigation into the Horizon scandal, and it looks like a number of people are going to be quite rightly so, held to account. I would say this, wouldn't I, because we've gone through the rigours of accreditation, but I think accreditation is the way forward. It gives you an assurance that you've got a verifiable process that is repeatable. Right. That for me there's no option. It's a fool's errand to think you can wing it or get away with it or bury your head in the sand and it will go away.
Professor Morris, do you agree?
I agree with the purpose of accreditation, and I think where there is a good, solid process, it can be helpful. But I think process compliance doesn't mean that we get the correct interpretation. And in fact, we're confusing in some cases consistency of evidence with quality of evidence. And there are a number of cases where they've come to me where someone has had accreditation, it's fallen under quality review, and they've looked for a different process to go through it. So I think it's how it's done.
Interesting.
Okay, so rather than a misinterpretation of data to necessarily prove that someone did something, I think we actually have more of a risk of miscarriage of justice if the data is not even located. And this is due to the increase in encryption, like we've mentioned, but also the dark web, which is a particular browser where users will go and use the internet and not leave any evidence behind them, not even a breadcrumb, other than they were on the dark web. And without such evidence, you remove digital forensics from the case. And what we were seeing was we were giving devices back that we could not prove what was on there. And therefore, that in itself is a miscarriage of justice.
Baroness Willis.
So this does lead on actually to the next question, which is about training and training in digital forensics for those people who aren't experts, such as police or lawyers. Are there such programs, and do you feel this is a gap, especially since everything's moving so quickly right now? How do people keep up with the knowledge base, or do they keep up with it? Maybe Jake, you can start.
Well, from the College of Policing side of things, yes, to my point earlier, where police officers and staff in digital forensics units are offered multiple courses and refreshers, which is invaluable. What we're tending to see now, rather than when I started, because I went into the police force with a mathematics degree, of which one module was computing, and to paraphrase my chief, I was more qualified than anyone in the force, hence I started in digital forensics.
Yeah.
Whereas now we are seeing many very impressive students with specific courses with the lust for helping the public and using their skills for good in the environment that they are hopefully destined to be in.
Okay, thank you. Professor Morris, you mentioned students coming into this area and then sort of being shocked by actually what they then have to deal with. I mean, do you find that there is a sort of is the training on the wrong foot? I mean, we've got training in the AI and the training in the digital, but not the training in the how to deal with what you're seeing. Is that?
Yeah, I'd say that's accurate. There's a lot of training on the art of investigation and putting the cases together, using the tools, dismantling the technical. But in terms of support and dealing with it, no, not that I'm aware of.
And is that where you're seeing the biggest drop-off in terms of people leaving because of that sort of aspect of?
I would say that's the majority of people I'm aware of that have left, that are not leaving under retirement.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Lord Borwick.
Is it hopeless to aspire to a magic tool that will tell you whether a piece of evidence is deep-faked, both a picture and audio?
AI is a necessary evil. It's a wonderful tool, yet it can cause so many issues. To see it as a silver bullet is extremely dangerous. To see it as an extra pair of eyes or hands is fortuitous for the human that is using it. So rather than it to take away,
we're putting it,
to take away that role, it effectively adds to that person. So it does require human validation and oversight, as always, and that will be going forward. We don't want to release AI tools that are not perfect too quickly. We see in so many areas of technology coming out just because it's new technology and it's released into the wild without real evaluation. So I think we need good legal frameworks around AI, better regulation of AI. If we can speed that process up in legislation and regulation, that would benefit everyone. But if we can use it positively to simplify, like we were saying earlier, a very complex report, or to do that initial analysis of a triaged phone, it's a great way of giving a flavour of what you're about to see, but then comes the human oversight, and that's why it's a brilliant additive to where we're going with the future of technology.
I think it's unlikely it could be treated as a panacea or a silver bullet. And I think it is. Last year, I collaborated with the Police Foundation, writing a paper about the use of AI in policing, and I think it is quite dangerous if it's used in the evidential chain. I think some of the points that Jake has made are very good, but we've seen a number of police forces are using AI to translate foreign language, Albanian, for example, into English. But I think some of the early work that's been done has identified that, you know, Albanian gangsters don't talk in received Albanian. It's vernacular. So an AI doesn't. AI learns as it goes on. So I think we have to exercise a lot of caution. I think we're not folding protein here. You know, and it took DeepMind, I think, something like 12 years to get to a point where they could build the algorithms and build the models to make that possible. So I think it's something we have to treat with the utmost caution, and I think a degree of skepticism as well. I would encourage healthy skepticism and challenge some statements that are being made by some very large, particularly some of the larger tech companies. They have the answer to everyone's problems. They don't.
Professor Morris, anything to add?
Only coming back to the deep fake issue you brought up, I think in terms of identifying them, you have bad actors working as quickly as we can on finding them, in identifying what we're doing to find them and finding ways around it. The same as at university, any AI plagiarism, students are immediately looking at the tool to find a way around it. So whatever we come up with to find a deep fake, there will be people, as soon as it's released, who find alternatives. So it's cat and mouse. There'll never be... I don't think you'll ever be able to do it without a human in the loop.
Lord Jason.
So, building on that point, Professor Morris, then, what would you see as the most important areas of research to address this growing threat? And do you see that there's value in the creation of a national institute to coordinate that research most effectively?
So I think, again, research, it depends on case specifics. There are such a wide range of things that come up. Trying to focus. Deep fakes are obviously going to be a problem, as is the wide range of evidence. In terms of a national institute, I would welcome it. I work with a lot of the UK forces, most of whom are reinventing the wheel. They'll be working on something and not aware that another force has already come up with a solution or written their own tool to do that particular thing. So a national coordination would be useful. I think when the Forensic Capability Network was introduced in 2000, we had high hopes that that's where it would go, but it's ended up being rather focused with smaller projects that aren't reaching those on the ground.
Could I just ask you a follow-up, just to make sure I understand you fully? So are you saying that the diversity of the challenges that face modern digital forensics means that it's just not practical to say these are the three R&D priorities?
I would say, given what I've seen of the different forces will have different priorities depending on the type of crime, the type of devices that they're coming in. In terms of research priorities, your smaller northern force is going to have different requirements to your larger force like the Met.
Because of the nature of crime that's taking place?
Yeah, I would say so.
That's helpful. Jake Moore, what's your view on this? Is it possible to identify major research priorities, or is it just too diverse?
We have to continue research. It is one of our biggest tools in our toolkit. But seeing isn't believing anymore, and what we deal with in the security industry is a zero trust model, where we effectively teach people to not trust anything until you can verify it in multiple ways, such as multi-factor authentication, for example, where we continually have to verify what something is.
An established technique. I'm sort of trying to push you to identify where's the cutting edge research needed to ensure that justice is done.
In particular, deep fakes, I think this is one of the bigger issues that we are facing. Right. We can't really rely on it because I was asked to carry out a test last year, for example. I got hold of the CCTV, which I was in. I was able to get hold of that footage, and I manipulated someone else's face on top of my face and then presented that as a media file to the business owner with no metadata, so no other information in underneath that video, which 15 years ago would have potentially been used as evidence in a court of law that the other person was there, but it was actually me that I'd manipulated it at such a level that even zooming in, you could not tell that it was fake by the eye, and therefore we have to zero trust this.
The state of the art today, and given that you are at the frontier of the state of the art, is it possible to tell whether something is sometimes?
Yes, the technology improves at the moment weekly. All of the tech companies are trying to beat each other to show off their range of tools, and we're only talking off-the-shelf tools, so the tools that you and I could buy. When we come to criminals, they don't care about regulation. So when I was able to clone, and I've been able to do it, clone people's voices and their video, you used to be able to do it without their consent. Now, the off-the-shelf tools, you do require their consent to do so.
Can I ask you about this National Institute? Would you see that would be of value should one be created to provide the clear priorities for research, for example, to tackle deepfake?
I can't see how that would benefit that much immediately. I would maybe ask my others here. I can't.
We need to move on quite quickly. I'm afraid.
Well, the short answer is no.
Steve, do you have anything to add to what's been said about research priorities?
No, only that I think creating a national institute is bound to get bogged down in bureaucracy. I think having it dispersed, having it is invaluable.
We're just about to. We've got a few more minutes left. Baroness Noble-Jones.
I think you can move on to the next question, Chairman.
Okay. In which case, the last question I think is a simple one. We're going to be making recommendations to the government when we report on this inquiry. What would you each say is your single top priority, the top priority recommendation that we should make? So one for each of you. What would you say? Professor Morris.
Better support for practitioners to support their mental health.
Okay, thank you.
I think I would say enable law enforcement to adopt national models such as Operation Atlas, using digital forensics capability with defined published league tables and defined KPIs.
Thank you very much.
And provide, you're probably expecting it, much more investment across all forces. For example, when they require funding for extra storage space, to be offered that funding immediately.
Well, thank you very much, all three of you. You answered many of our questions. It's been very informative. We're very grateful. Thank you very much. And that concludes today's